So welcome to the second Living Newspaper study group, which we have organised Hospital Field with artist Bik Van der Pol and with the contributing artist Simon Bedwell. So I'm not sure if everyone knows what Hospital Field is, where we are. Hospital Field is an artist's house on the northeast coast of Scotland in a town called Arbroath. We were founded as an art school in 1901 and we've been running as a residential art centre since roughly the 1930s. Supporting artists and education around the arts is at the core of what we do. It's as part of our constitution, and these kind of pedagogical events exploring the production and ways of producing work are very much at the core of what we do. The study groups have formed out of the FIELDWORK International Summer School, which has run since 2014. In 2020, we invited artists Bik Van der Pol, Lisbeth and Jos, who are you can see on the screen, to programme the summer school with us. And given everything that has happened with the pandemic and COVID-19, that relationship, our relationship with Bik Van der Pol has extended from 2019 to 2020 to 2021. So last year we had our first online summer school, as I think many people experienced many kinds of events online for the first time. And we begun with the summer school titled Now What, which departed from two objects and a series of ideas. The objects were the Forfa Scold's Bridal and the document of the Declaration of Arbroath, and we were looking at the idea of muting and the idea in action of muting and unmuting. So as a continuation of that conversation that was begun with some of you who are here present today, we continued the conversation, Lisbeth, Jos, Lucy Byatt, the director of Hospital Field, and myself. And Lisbeth and Jos were particularly interested in and had been researching and come across the Living newspaper as part of the New Deal in the United States in the 1930s. So I will now pass over to Lisbeth and Jos, who will be giving a little bit more context. One thing I wanted to highlight was in my emails, I don't know whether I hope that you did see that there was an exercise that was in the introduction emails that I sent a couple of times over this week. We have asked the group to pick out an element, perhaps unnoticeable element of a news story, a current news story that you might be able to speculate on or imagine could become something more newsworthy or potentially satire-worthy. So at 4 o'clock, after a short break, we're hoping to move around the room and explore some of these details together as part of a conversation. This will be after though, however, we've heard from Lisbeth and Jos, Bik Van der Pol, as well as the contribution from Simon Bedwell. So I'll hand over to you, Lisbeth and Jos.
Hello,
Hi.
all.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming again. And yeah, for those who were not here last week, we will again do a small introduction on how we sort of encountered the Living newspaper. I think it was already 2018. We were invited by SF MoMA and the San Francisco Public Libraries. They embarked on a project which was called Public Knowledge. And under the umbrella of Public Knowledge, they invited 6 artists or artist group to explore the issue of what is public, what is knowledge, and how that sort of is maybe threatened, reinforced in today's societies, and what sort of influences public knowledge or the lack thereof may have on how these societies function. So it was maybe it was an open brief, an open invitation, but certainly with some kind of direction and interest. And the public library, which we have to learn, which we learned to call actually the only public space in the whole city of San Francisco, Bedwell, from our experience, was obviously a very important partner in this whole project. So when we came to San Francisco, we didn't know yet what we wanted to do, but we knew that we wanted to do something with how this city has developed from being a settlement for the gold rush. So that's where the city began as a city, I would say, towards its wealth and towards its being, how do you say it, a hub for all sorts of infrastructure, the train, planes, etc., transportation, harbor, this kind of activities. And how today the city has become a center point or a hub or a point of conversion or coming together of Silicon Valley, and all the top 5 richest companies in the world, Google, Apple, you name it, are there. And they play a very important part in the development of that city, not only because of the access to social media, but also in reality, let's say on the ground, how this influences housing issues, how it pushes up the prices of houses, how people are not able to live anymore in San Francisco because, you know, it goes 300% over the top, no? So these things we wanted to take into account, but we didn't yet know how something that's so large, how you can sort of, you know, find a way to discuss this and find a way to find a form. We always try to find something like a little lead, an object, a hyper object perhaps, where we can sort of start pushing and pulling and develop ideas and content around. So when we were speaking with Gray Bracken, who is an architect historian, he was talking about the WPA. He was one of the founders of the Living New Deal, an organization that today is reflecting back on the New Deal and tries to sort of reactivate it in different ways in the United States. He called the New Deal the only socialist moment in the United States. Maybe it's coming back, but I doubt it. And he was mentioning a model of the city, a scale model of 15 by 15 meters, which was built in the 1930s by carpenters and craftsmen who were got the possibility to work, let's say, under the New Deal, which is like a work. It's under the WPA, which is the Workers' Progress Administration, which is a program that's an economic support program, you could say, that put everybody to work in order to provide them for an income in the 1930s when the crisis was there. So this WPA project and the New Deal was, you know, it was artist projects, it was writers projects, it was theater projects, but it also public art projects, but also public works like infrastructures, dams, roads, etc., etc. So huge, you could say. So when we found this model, we thought this is it, and we started in 3-4 stages. We started to develop the project. First of all, we had to find it. We managed to get it out of Berkeley warehouse. Then we had to clean it, which was the first phase, and we gathered, I think, 100 volunteers around the model and sort of inventorize what was missing, etc., what it actually was. And then in the second stage, a year later, we disseminated. The whole model consists of, I don't know, 160 pieces, something like that. Disseminated the model in 29 parts to the 29 libraries, and that was in February, March 2019 already, where we organized the whole program in collaboration with the different libraries around this model to actually start talking about the city and to also to reimagine the city by way of its people, you could say. The third phase of the project would have been last year, 2020, and obviously that has been tabled, as they say very elegantly. Probably that means that it will never happen, but you know, we keep hoping. That stage would have been to bring the whole model together in one space, which is actually it seems an easy task to do, but it's actually very difficult for the same actual reasons of why there's plenty of huge spaces in the city of San Francisco, but it's not possible to install a model there for a certain amount of time because of the they are continuously rented out, let's say, to these bigger corporations for lots of money, which also allows these people of these spaces to actually exist. No, so it was, I would say that the three stages towards the finalization of it was actually a preparation to prepare people and also institutions to actually welcome the model that is actually their model. No, we called the project also as a subtitle, Is There Room for San Francisco in San Francisco? So the third stage, when the model should have come together eventually in the San Francisco College, would have worked if COVID wouldn't have passed by, and we were thinking of how to sort of bring this model to life. So we were investigating also the living newspapers, the federal project, how through theatrical forms activation of certain issues could come about. So we were sort of pondering with this, speculating with the idea of the living newspaper as a form to sort of receive and welcome and carry this whole model with the help of all the actors actually that are also the public, to bring, during, for example, 30 days, this model back to life and then sort of present it to the public. So in a form of theatricality, you could say. So this didn't happen, but when we were continuing to talk, and it's very nice, and of course there's a lot to say about COVID, but one of the things that I really appreciate is the longevity of things. That I already was very enthusiastic about how we worked, let's say, for 2 or 3 years in San Francisco. But I also, or I should also, I hope that you also appreciate that. But the working together with Hospital Field, first the summer school, then actually the summer school wasn't live. Then we started talking, or we continued to talk actually. And then we thought, okay, what can be then the next subject from that is sort of derived from the first summer school into a second one, hoping that we will eventually be able to get together and to see what we can do collectively, with participants. So that is where we are right now, and these 3 workshops, these 3 seminars are a way to sort of gather, let's say, research material, thinking, so 2 weeks ago we had Rania Karoula. She was talking about the history of the living newspapers in depth, I would say, very, very rich source of knowledge, I would say. And if I'm not mistaken, you can also listen back to this. Maybe you can share at some point, Cicely, the Vimeo link, if it's not on the website already. No, I didn't keep track of that. But I think it's interesting to see it again and to sort of keep that in mind. And then today we have Simon Bedwell, and in 2 weeks we will have Liz Magic Laser, an artist from New York who has worked with the living newspaper as a performative form. And that in 2 weeks will be also, a challenge to our performative capacities on Zoom, I would say. So I think it would be great. And then in June, somewhere June, July, we will get together with a group, hopefully partly live as well, to have a more intensive workshop in relation to how to gather material, how to script, and how to eventually make a living newspaper that hopefully will be performed, presented in August when the summer school is there. No, so that's a little bit like the steps. And I don't know, did I forget something? No. Cicely, Lucy, did I forget something? No. Did I contextualize it enough?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've just put some of those links in the chat section.
Yeah.
Recording of Rania's link.
I was thinking, should I sort of summarize the meeting of 2 weeks ago? But I think that's too much. No, I don't think that's a good idea. There's a lot of information on the living newspapers that we can eventually also share with all of you as a reading list, or as if you want to search more, if you want to know more. Rania also had two websites. That's an archive with lots of images and materials. So that's also very helpful to have, or interesting to have if you're curious. No?
Yeah, there's also a long feature film on YouTube you can watch for free. It's called Cradle Will Rock, and it's a film made about the theater project
By Tim Robbins.
By
no?
Tim Robbins,
Yeah.
the director. And we can put the YouTube link if you're really interested in the historical facts.
Yeah, but also how it's playing out in film. No?
Yeah.
Very dense, very but interesting. Yeah.
So I can email that around and I'll put that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
I think that was everything. I've also put in the chat the Liz Magic Lasers workshop put on the 22nd of April, as well as, and a bit of information is in there, and also a link to the Google Drive where I've been uploading various files and readings. And in that folder is also a preamble from Simon in relationship to the presentation that he's giving today. So by way of short introduction, because we will be running close to time, so we're really grateful for Simon to have formed part of this conversation with us. Simon Bedwell is an artist based in London. I'll give a bit of a formal introduction. He has made posters, sculpture, publications, exhibitions, paintings and videos, both alone and with other artists. I imagine many of you know the London art group Bank, which ran from 1991 to 2003, which Simon was a part of. His work has been characterised by sprawling, polemical, sensuous, vulgar, snarky, and a snarky attitude towards art politics, and the politics of art. So we were particularly interested to invite Simon. It was when we were talking about the living newspaper, talking about the ideas of running these study groups. Simon's an artist that we at Hospital Field have worked with in the past, and we were particularly interested to ask Simon because of his approach to art, satire, politics, and some of the attitudes that come across in his work, and also through conversation as well, that we thought could be a really interesting take on the living newspaper as we approach it from artists' perspective as well, rather than from the theatrical perspective. So Simon, I think that share screen is switched on. I will hand over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to do a quick preamble, then I'll play my PowerPoint and share my screen, right? Yeah. Okay, thanks Cicely, thanks everyone. I knew nothing about the living newspaper until Cicely had got in touch, and I watched the film, the rather scratchy film on YouTube, and the thing I got from it really can be summed up in the line that, as far as I can gather, they used to say at the end of each act or something, say, can you sing, dance or act? If you can, it's a well-established fact that Uncle Sam will take you in, break you in, etc., etc. It reminded me of, I don't know, the scratch orchestra, anyone can play, and punk, anyone can do it. I mean, these are myths, but partly, but that's what it reminded me of a little. And so participation seems quite an important part of this. And that got me thinking about what has happened to art since that time, I suppose. I mean, it's a big subject, I won't be able to nail it, but it seems to relate to the concern artists always have to address real life, you know, and the guilt about being esoteric or elitist. And that this is always a flip-flopping for any artist, I think. And it seems to me that ever since the pictures generation, maybe from the late 70s, early 80s in New York, probably before, but this seems a handy place. The logic has been that the only revolution, in inverted commas, for an artist that's cool has been from the inside. In other words, it's cool to look corporate, which seems rather convenient to me. So I got thinking about form, that old word that is apparently opposed to, but is in fact, of course, part of content. And that this has to be part of this, and that form, you know, simply put, how an artwork is made, what it looks like, what color it is, etc. This has always been sidelined as non-intellectual compared to content. And we are right now in very, very politicized times, I think, where this is perhaps more true than ever. And it seems to me that the last 20, maybe 30 years, certainly 20, because Bank did a big press release about this in '97, I think, that the form of political art that is now considered the only serious one is bureaucratic. It's a trestle table with interesting documents on, which at least implies and sometimes describes that it's not really interested in form, it's only interested in content. Now, that's fine, because, you know, art can be anything, right? But it seems to me that what is being said in an artwork is said through what it looks like, the colors and basic stuff like that, as well as the ostensible content, the message. And the living newspaper made me revisit those thoughts, really, and in a way lament the fact that this seems to be the trajectory these days. So, you know, I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm just saying that other things can happen too, and they've been a bit sidelined of late and intellectually patronized, I think. Certainly from my completely one-sided direction from the London art world, or not that I even know much about that, to be honest, but this is what I sort of think. So it seems to miss out a lot of the things we might value in life, including fun. And the living newspaper and the project at Hospital Fields is maybe an opportunity to reignite some of that again. So I'm not arguing for a world without the Protestant aesthetics of Maria Eichhorn, Joseph Kossuth and forensic architecture, just for one which gives equal weight to Rabelais, Henry Darger, Kippenberger and the Chapman brothers. And this idea of newspapers and maybe now social media, they're so promiscuous and sprawling that it might represent a model or something with art keeping in touch with so-called real life. Anyway, that's my preamble. I'm now going to put on my screen and play the PowerPoint and show you some of my stuff from now quite a long time. This slideshow starts in 1987, so but don't worry, it won't take as long as that sounds. Right, now I'm going to share my screen. Sorry for this. Okay. Desktop 1. Everybody see that? Yeah, okay. All right, this is from 1980. I mean, a lot of this stuff, I don't want this to be just some self-indulgent, you know, here's what I did thing. So I'm going to try and tie it to the potential for what might happen in the summer at Hospital Field, basically. And so a lot of it's to do with public address and how art might or might not address a putative public. You know, of course, one never knows who that is. One hopes for the best, right? Anyway, this was 1987. There was an election. Got this flyer through the door for a candidate for the Conservative Party, who of course won. It was Brighton. It was quite posh then, called Burns. And I snipped the S off the surname and put it at the end of Conservative. And then photocopied them onto A3 paper, black and white, and about 2 in the morning, coming up to the election night, I went around Brighton pasting these up on various walls. Any place I saw one of these in the window, I tried to target. Very dangerous looking back, and the sentiments are, of course, you know, sticky. But the formal turnaround of taking something and flipping it is something I've always been interested in, I suppose. And anyway, it's an example of reasonably aggressive, you know, in a way I wouldn't countenance now, public address, I suppose. I do not want to burn Conservative voters, but the joke was too tempting to miss. This is now 93. The group bank that I was part of for 12 years, a long time. There were 5 of us, then 4, then 3, then 2, as these things go. Amazed it lasted so long. This is a project with big paintings. These are about like, I don't know, what would they be? 15 foot tall, something like that, pretty tall. And they were all based on newspaper photographs and current stories. It was an attempt to do an updated version of history painting, I suppose. So that one there's Lady Di feeding, doling out food in an African country, Keith Haring in the background, advertising, so on. This is in an abandoned, now demolished place in King's Cross, London. A couple of years later, we did this sort of media empire show called Viper Bank TV. 130 artists, every day was different. Really difficult to consume or represent now. But every day we filmed for some hours and made VHS copies of these films, many performances and so on, and biked them to various venues and sent them to various venues who said they'd play them on their monitors in their spaces, including the ICA London and places in Manchester and Scotland. You know, a big, sprawling, crazy show, impossible to curate or anything with, but interesting because of that, because it changed every day. And part of this was a newspaper. We did a tabloid newspaper for every day of this show in London, which was, I think, 12 days in all. But mostly this is what it looked like when you went to the space. There's an empty stage, there were videos playing. Every night there was a Bob and Roberta Smith sort of evening show, and lots of artists coming in and doing performances, which we filmed rather badly, it has to be said, but we did. So this newspaper that I'm talking about is an accompaniment to our sort of crappy media empire. This is the representation of it we made in a big live show in Portugal in 96, I think, 97, can't remember, which was a sort of Britpack plus a few indie spaces sort of show. So this is all the front covers. We went on to do more than this. We did them sporadically. We did a whole set for a sort of artists union fundraising evening, for example. Then we got a Christmas show at the ICA. We did another 12 then. So there were 34 in all. And basically the idea was that no one's really interested in contemporary art. So we'll do a populist tabloid sort of trashy form for it, which would be entirely art world centered, you know, and really arcane because of that. Many of the stories, none of you will have any meaning to you whatsoever, because it was a very microscopic kind of use of the tabloid, really. And of course, it took its inspiration really mostly from the Sun newspaper, the notorious best-selling tabloid in England for some years, still is, I think. Now, it's different looking at this as opposed to mid-90s, because it's an obnoxious way of political manipulation, as I think we probably all know, which under Blair, for example, seemed less noxious than it now does and did back before. But anyway, it was the energy and the sort of scurrilous way that they wrote that interested us about this. We were once accused of doing Private Eye for a version of Private Eye for the art world, which we never really thought of it as really. Private Eye is really public school, and we wanted to be more sort of tabloid, I think, than that. But, you know, there are various stories about art films crap, is the Chisenhale crap? Lots of stuff slagging off curators quite often, which even in 1996, we were beginning to be pissed off at this whole new administrative tier that was growing up fast in the art world. A bit like the one in the NHS, you know, the Tories did put more money in, but it all went on management. So, you know, endless jokes really about the people in charge of the art world being lazy, stupid, whatever. And of course, you know, like any indie show, any indie space, we are not talking hundreds and hundreds of people coming every day. So, you know, this is very niche, and in a way it's later, as Bank got a bit more well-known and stuff, that these began to pick up interest more. At the time, we sold almost none, I think, really. And we just used to photocopy them at the local shop on their photocopier. So fake adverts, stupid editorials, some serious points buried amongst the sleaze and the shock, and a lot of just straightforward adolescent stupidity, to be frank. It was great fun doing it. It was just sitting in the office, talking crap, and who should we slag off next, and trying to think up stupid puns that would do the job and so on. And the ones at the ICA, we got a bit of funding from them, so we managed to have a red top, like the Sun newspaper, with a bit of colour on the front covers as well. There's gossip column, again, incredibly microscopic, deliberately so, you know, that was the joke to us. You take a populist form and you completely fill it with the most arcane trivia that nobody outside the very, very tiny art world would even think about or be interested in. I'm pausing a bit because I'm presuming some people want to read some of this sort of scurrilous nonsense that we wrote all these years ago. Oh, this is one that Cicely remembers, I think. Weren't you on this course, Cicely? After this, a year or two later, we, and this again is a different public address point, not really to the point, but I thought I'd include a brief, we were running a gallery really, so we used to get press releases through the door all the time. And eventually from America as well, because we were going to do this show in New York, so the gallery there was sending us American ones too, as you can see. It's called we just pretended we were running a service to help people with their press releases, galleries. Because I mean, we all know it, right? They're all full of crap. And we just decided to do something about it. And we had a show in '98 that we had to invigilate for like 6 weeks. And so we decided to fill the time by doing this really, which is, you know, as is obvious looking at these, correcting spelling mistakes, sometimes actually thinking we've got a point, other times just scurrilously making a point up. And they nearly all got extremely low marks, of course. And then we used to fax them back to the galleries. So they couldn't stop it coming in, it was coming at them. And they could throw it in the bin, I'm sure most of them did. We got some furious phone calls. But again, it's, and also the point about, which connects to the living newspaper maybe, is redundancy of technology, because it's tempting, isn't it, always to think that, oh, been there, done that, we must move forward. We can only use, let's say, digital now, because to use paper is stupid, to use anything else is stupid. I don't really believe in that. I think that the things from the past possibly should be recycled for, and not necessarily brought up to date, but just in formal terms, offer things that, this idea that you know, to be modern is to always use what's available now, and only that, misses out on sometimes. So I do think there is a power to using apparently redundant technologies. So I think the Living Newspaper Project could harness, really. I mean, doesn't Walter Benjamin say somewhere that the power of the past, the revolutionary power of the past, is to show us that things can change because we can see that it's different. And he meant that about objects as well, I think. After that, I did a whole series of poster works, which is, again, like the one on the right, I think, was from a charity shop, and the one on the left. And so altering what I've found in the world, I guess, and turning it back to the world again. My favorites are the ones that are just thrown away, really, or the ones that I've taken off actual walls. So the one on the right, I think I found in a space we used for one of our shows, early days. The one on the left, again, Oxfam. The one on the left here is taken off a wall in Italy, I think, which was a language school advert, I think. This one's quite big, it's like 4 foot. Anyway, so another twist on the, hopefully, the public address thing. At the same time, I got commissioned to do these, well, commissioned, I didn't get paid, but they called it a commission. Always wondered why, I think I know. To do these deliberately sort of downbeat, rather primitive looking word art posters for Piccadilly Circus concourse. It's very different now, it's been remodeled. These were deliberately meant to look like, I don't know, Eastern Bloc advertising circa 1978 or something, I guess. I mean, meant to be clunky. Whether they are or not, I don't know, but it was good fun doing a whole station's worth. This is the show I did at Hospital Field in 2017, which was changed what I did, really. Show called Society, a name after the great early 80s sort of schlock horror film, comedy horror, I suppose. None of you have seen it. I would urge you to see it. It's pre-CGI, lots of latex involved. Anyway, it's great. And just an off chance comment from my other half when we were looking around the main hall in Hospital Field, where she described the side room as a cabinet, I think. Suddenly something went ping in my head and I thought, cabinet, politicians. Yeah, that's what I'll do. And so I started collecting pictures of laughing politicians. You'll see there's very few of the ones on the poster left in cabinet now. Such of our turbulent times. I had 9 days to make Michael Gove because he suddenly was back in the cabinet. The inspiration for this, as well as the space at Hospital Field, was Steve Bell, really, but also John Kay. You'll see the etching. Where's my cursor? This is a Edinburgh etcher from 2 centuries ago, a satirical chronicler of everyday life in a way, still underrated. And this is God, Gilray, isn't it? And the classic English, far more famous political satirist. But Steve Bell is also underrated, great artist, I think. And I made pots out of which ostensibly represent these politicians, and the whole cabinet was involved. Here they are in my studio, kind of photo call for some of them. And here they are in situ in the main rooms in the main hall in the Hospital Field. I think that's Andrea Leadsom, top in the middle of the right there. Bottom left, the Scottish Secretary, he's now changed, I think. That's Damien Green on the left there, the guy that was found to have been watching pornography in office hours. And that's Liz Truss on the right. Oh, it's Theresa May on the left in that one. And that's Chris Failing-Grayling on the right there. The flaky, bad glaze seemed to somehow suit him, I think. This is the show I did in it opened on March 29th, 2019, i.e. the night we were scheduled to leave the European Union before it got knocked back again and again. It was in this strange house in Pimlico, now refurbished. It looked like it hadn't been touched since about 1968 or something. The show is called The Entertaining Mr. Bone. That's Peter Bone as the picture on the wall on the left one. He's a Conservative MP that was a long-standing Brexiteer. Sorry, Brexiter, hate using that word, Brexiteer. Nigel Farage is on the bottom of the left picture as a sculpture. I basically did all the politicians of the cabinet as kind of grubs or sort of slugs, piled on top of each other to some extent. On the top room, there was a whole series of portraits of the cabinet again, obviously, and all those radiators were on full. So there are about 8 radiators on full for the duration. And that's a poster again that I took off the wall just before the vote to leave the European Union. A terrible, terrible idea in my view. And the testicles on that phallic sculpture there are Theresa May and Gavin Williamson, who was then Defence Secretary. And yeah, there's Rees-Mogg and so on in the back. Anyway, and that's the sort of courtyard garden downstairs. Beautiful house, amazing. And, you know, that's where I'm at. And this is like right up to date. The one on the right is a kind of revamping and addition to some of the ones I showed in that strange house. And they're getting more and more big and suppurating as I get better at this very tricky medium. That's, I think, David Cameron's face you can't see very clearly. I think that was Liam Fox, or it might be Paul Dacre, the Daily Mail editor, can't remember. And this is David Davis, the idiot that was in charge of our negotiations for a while. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Simon. Did anyone have any comments or questions? We've got about 10 minutes or observations. Alexandra, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my, oh, here we go, video back on. I just had a comment in relation to your prologue, I guess, about form.
Yeah.
I'm by no means an expert in this, but it related to some things I've been researching lately. And interestingly enough, both examples actually had to do with the theater. And I have not an expertise, but a little bit of research background in Japan and Japanese arts. And so the other day I was looking a little bit again at no drama and art theories behind no drama, and was reminded that, you know, one of the greatest writers of no drama at the time, Zeami, has said quite famously that the purpose of no is actually something called yugen, which is an aesthetic term, sort of a theory, aesthetic theory term, very common in Eastern art, which is all about form. So essentially his idea of what no drama is supposed to do and what it's supposed to do to the audience is, it's not about the story. I mean, the story is important, but it's not the primary part of it. The whole point essentially is form, is yugen. And then that made me look up again a little bit in contrast, you know, Aristotle's Poetics, which is sort of the first art and literary theory in the West, in which he says the whole point of tragedy, at least, is catharsis, right? And, you know, so just that idea in the last month or so since I have been looking those things up, had been banging around in my head. You have yugen, right, in Japan versus catharsis as the kind of theory that's sort of literary, in this case theater theory, in the West, and what that has meant, right, to where art and theater perhaps in particular have gone in our part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some no theatre in Tokyo. Yeah, and the stories are simply carriers of form, really.
Right.
The actual narratives are the thing that kind of allow the form to happen. And actually, I remember in it's not just Eastern. I remember what's the novel with Lily Bart in it? House of Mirth. There's this Edith Wharton novel where Lily Bart, who's a society beauty essentially in New York, takes part in a sort of vignettes. People used to go to the theatres, and on the stage, basically people did vignettes which were living paintings. So she would pose like a famous Gainsborough painting or something like this. People would applaud. Then the next one came on. So that seems also more to do with form than whatever we might call content, you know, I guess. But I guess, yeah, I wasn't really probably following my own brief about how this relates to what might happen in the summer. But it seemed to me that it's a helpful. We live in an age where we're meant to have a serious message for our audience. I suppose very simply, I'm saying that the form is more of the message than we like to think or have now been taught to think. But also that the simpler the message, the more inventive and expressive perhaps the form is then allowed, in inverted commas, to be. So there's this kind of payoff to the simplifications that seem to come with propagandistic message. And the payoff isn't a trivial one for artists, it's a big one, because it allows you.
I don't think it's just propagandistic messages, you know. I think especially if you look outside the Western canon, you know, then the form becomes more, you know, often the narrative or the story is something that's been told that everybody knows, right? Time and time again. It's very simple, as you say, not necessarily propagandistic, but common knowledge almost. And then the form is what is actually the most creative element in it, in the work. Yeah.
Well, which is, I think I can't see any real way back from the form being seen as a sort of manual labor, you know, low in the hierarchy, necessary but banal necessity to convey the content. But I do think that attitude, which I think is very entrenched these days, is not very useful for artists. I think it's a negative thing for art, actually. But I can't see a way out of that. I do think this is the way that it has gone. And I suppose I'm trying to connect it to what might happen, because the reason I said propaganda really is partly what, as you say, but it's also because if you're going to make a living newspaper, you know, something from an actual newspaper, it does seem to nudge towards something we associate with propaganda, maybe. Because how else would you make the newspaper live? I mean, I guess hopefully some of you will have examples of precisely this, that some trivial story about a cat stuck up a tree might be the exact story that you're bringing to the table here or something. But anyway, I'm not really making much sense, but certainly that's a good example. The no theatre of form as preeminent, for sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to come, thank you for the question, Alexandra. I'm going to actually move on to another Alexandra in the room who's got a question. Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed that. I think pointing at a statue of kind of shit and saying that's David Cameron is really, really good performance art. But I guess my question is about kind of pleasure and pastiche and British culture and the way it relates to class, because I completely recognize and identify this like bureaucratic style that you talk about, and you mentioned forensic architecture, and I think it's kind of important to talk about them as a stylistic movement more than a formal movement. But there's also this kind of maybe a more recent sort of micro trend that I think is emerging, where there's a kind of like punk aesthetic that's being brought back. And I think the Michael Clarke retrospective at the Barbican was part of this. And then there's kind of a sort of more performative turn in lots of kind of British artists doing these sort of like Grebo pantomime things. And it's like, it's really interesting, but it has this real kind of retrospective, almost pastiche aesthetic to it. And it's, I don't know, it's, to me, it seems like a very British condition where there's like a kind of recapturing of a former sort of class position or something. And I guess the question that I have is like, and I think this was very much in your presentation, is like, how seriously can you like take, I mean, it's important to take seriously the idea of like visual difference as a political strategy, and the aesthetic as being very central to that and not like secondary. But what can we, you know, I don't know, it's not really a question for you to answer, but it's just something I wanted to put to it, that there's kind of like multiple types of like recuperation going on.
Multiple types of what?
Sort of recuperation of different aesthetic strategies that belong to different moments of politics. So like, I think, just to go back to the Michael Clarke example, I think like putting on a show by Michael Clarke in the Barbican today was a really kind of like interesting statement about what kind of former sort of avant-garde British moment the Barbican is trying to talk about. But to me, it kind of registered as a kind of pleasurable pastiche experience, and so therefore is not a political moment any longer. And I guess, so that was the question. It's like, or maybe I'm just more trying to identify these kind of loops of cultural reappropriation that I think is very specific to Britain in a way, in the way British culture kind of reforms itself. And if there's anything you had to say to that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a friend saying that, you know, punk was retro. And so, you know, I'm a bit dubious about, well, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about how this has all made me think about what a fetish agency is for art and the art world. And, you know, the thing I'm slagging off, the sort of trestle table art, is basically, to me, just a symptom of that sort of middle-class guilt about agency, really. You know, the thing that hovers with any artist all the time, if they've got half a brain, it seems to me, is that what you're doing is pointless and useless. As opposed to, you know, I mean, I once talked to a guy in a bank retrospective, a small bank retrospective in Paris, who his life is spent clearing Sri Lankan fields of landmines. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, hands up, you are doing use in the world that I am not part of, you know. So anyway, I strayed a bit there, but yes, this fetish of agency, you know, the way out of guilt about being some middle-class bourgeois aesthete is that your art has an actual effect on the actual world. Mm. This is a grand fetish. And of course, art, certainly not directly, I don't think, I would argue, maybe tangentially, doesn't have any effect on the real world, really. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, therefore, you're simply decorating and content to decorate the world, you know. So how does this relate to what you're saying? Yeah, I don't really know. I'm way off the point anyway, and I'm lost somewhere in the thickets of something.
That was helpful for me. Thank you.
But, I'm trying to think of punk though. I mean, I caught the tail end of punk. I'm that old now. I saw the Buzzcocks, I think, in '78 when I was 15. Subway Sex Supporting. I saw quite a few bands basically. I was always small, so I could never pretend I was older than I was, annoyingly. So I missed a lot. But anyway, so I fetishize it too. I think, you know, like a lot of my generation, the way my entry to culture was through 7-inch singles and the NME, you know. It wasn't through my parents taking me to the opera. So I fetishize punk as well. I do think it's a unique moment. Whether it had any agency other than stylistic, I'm doubtful of, actually. Mm-hmm. But I'm also increasingly doubtful about whether mainstream politics has that much agency, weirdly, in spite of food banks and everything, which illustrate clearly that it does have. Anyway, but I'm wondering how this relates to the possibilities of the summer project. And for me, it's something to do with public address, the opportunities for fun, for example, which is much underrated in art, and for the carnivalesque, and not necessarily catharsis, perhaps simply form. These seem like opportunities that are not to be sneezed at in terms of, you know, the excitement, and it's an excitement I kind of miss. I was in a group with other people for 12 years, you know, of group activity in an artistic manner, and what might result from that, you know, and the risks of that too, and the adrenaline of that, because of course it might all be terrible. So I think these are quite big opportunities that are quite rare these days. In spite of what you say, I'm not particularly in touch though. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot more about what's going on in that department. I've never even heard of grunge. What did you call it? Grunge?
I was being a bit facetious. It's it's a kind of Grebo pantomime, and actually it might be interesting to note that a lot of the artists that I feel do that are Anthony Davis's former students. So there is also this kind of lineage to a kind of earlier moment of sort of a kind of British and very specifically London counterculture. But that's
yeah. Haven't seen him for a long time. What's he doing now? Anyway.
So I'm conscious that we've got a couple more questions, and also we were going to move towards this exercise with the bringing details. I thought maybe a useful thing just at this point when we're talking about aesthetic or form, and where the inspiration, or if there's a version of pastiche being performed, actually having a look at what the Royal Court are doing with their production, because there is a flamboyance, there is a joy, there is a lot of humour within those productions, which are currently running at the moment, and I think I've put them in the chat. It's very much worthwhile having a look at how they're interpreting it. So, and also, I think that's worth having a look at how that's performed. I noticed, so it was Anastasia has got a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to say it aloud. I can read it also.
Hi. Did that work?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I just wanted to ask something simple about the upside downness of the heads. I thought it worked really well in the space next to some of the existing objects and faces.
Yeah, it's just the simple thing that a pot looks like a head upside down. It couldn't be the other way up. Well, it could be, but it wouldn't be a pot anymore. So I started off ceramics. I got more interested in this about 12 years ago, and it gradually took more and more of a hold of me. And I had already been casting my own head and doing lots of body casts and things, and I'd used my own head as pots. And so it was a reasonably natural transition to turn them into politicians, I suppose. But yeah, it's just that. Also, one of the inspirations, if you can call it that, was Caligula, the movie. Pretty terrible movie, actually, where there's a big machine that where they bury people up to their neck in the Roman Forum, you know, for Caligula's evil entertainment. And this kind of weird threshing machine drives out with big blades and gradually lops their heads off. And somehow that always, so the idea of having, and also the joke about just off with their head, you know, with the current government, you know, from Alice in Wonderland or whatever. I guess it's a way of having a smiling, decapitated head of the current cabinet in a way that's sort of potentially decorative and indeed potentially functional as a pot in the world, I suppose. But also just the inversion, you know, just the flipping again. Something quite interesting about upside downness per se to me. I don't really know why. On one level, it's just a very simple joke, you know. Indeed, I've done whole figures, some of which you maybe saw in the thing, where the head actually balances the whole worm-like body that goes up to about 5 foot. Some of which just balance on their own. But yeah, in a way, I don't know. It's just the neatness of the inversion was what appealed, I suppose, and the coincidence of it also then being a pot. And I suppose the Caligula thing, and also another reference I would mention would be the end of the Pasolini film, 120 Days of Sodom, Salo, where the fascists look out of the house and these beautiful young men are being garroted in the garden and they're laughing. And there's something very weird and disturbing about somebody laughing as they die. as horror fans will know, right? So somehow that's in there too. So there's some dark stuff hovering around my fantasies of a decapitated cabinet, I think. There's another question here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this relates actually to what I've just said, maybe because something about pots is useless. We don't need them anymore. You know, we've got better ways of carrying water around and so on. So before I was interested in doing caricature and so on, 10 years ago maybe, I was interested in the idea of the pot per se because of its uselessness. So yeah.
So thank you, Simon and Anastasia, and Allo is adding a few comments into the chat. Shall we take a couple of minutes break, just if anyone, comfort break and the like, and then if we come back at 10, at just after 10 past, nice and awkwardly 13 minutes past, and then we can have a go at this exercise we've put in place, and feel free to stay and chat if you don't want to have the break as well. I will step away for a couple of minutes.